Support for this episode comes from Dexcom. Like most of you, we don't love worrying about insurance. I'm thrilled to tell you that Dexcom CGM is covered as a medical benefit for 98% of commercial insurance plan holders who have type 1 diabetes. And more plans cover CGM for people with type 2 who use insulin. We even have it as a pharmacy benefit, so I can process it at the local pharmacy. They put it on auto refill for me, which makes it really easy. It's one less thing to think about. It's worth checking to see if that's available to you. And Dexcom will even help you do a benefits check to see what your insurance covers. It's easy. It's right on the website. Dexcom is the #1 covered CGM brand. Learn more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, let's talk about driving with diabetes. Getting a driver's license as a teenager comes with enough challenges without type 1, but letting your child with T1D get behind the wheel is stressful, to say the least. I'm sharing what worked for us and expert advice that may help you, plus tips to let technology be your friend in the car. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another week of the show. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2 back in 2006. He is now 19, and he has been driving ever since the first moment he could get his license. It was like 4 days after he turned 16. I know every state is a little bit different. Here in North Carolina, they start them early, maybe a little too early, but hey, it is what it is. I've been seeing a ton of posts about driving in my social media diabetes moms groups recently, and it has come up at Moms Night Out events too. You know, it's always top of mind for moms and dads of teenage kids. So I thought it would be a good time to release this excerpt from Still the World's Worst Diabetes Mom. This is my second book in the series. If you're not familiar, I wrote The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, Real Life Stories of Parenting a Child with Type 1 Diabetes, because I was really worried about what I was seeing as like this quest for perfect diabetes parenting. This was not something that was around when Benny was diagnosed back in 2006. But, you know, we see lots of influencers and other podcasters talking about straight lines and super low A1Cs at the expense, I think, of mental health, a more fun childhood, and parent worry and burnout. Yes, you can do that. You can do great stuff with diabetes and have great outcomes with a very well-rounded family and childhood. Not everybody does this, but man, you know what I'm talking about. This pressure, this real tough stuff just wasn't there before social media. So the second book continued the theme, but actually has more practical advice, I think, including all about driving. Both books have won several awards. Sorry if it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but I really am proud of the work I did here. And they are both available as audiobooks, paperback, or ebooks. Links in the show notes, but you can get it everywhere you buy books online. All right, here is chapter 17 from Still the World's Worst Diabetes Mom, Driving and Diabetes, right after this. Now that Benny is on his own more and more, I'm grateful that he's open about his diabetes journey and always tells his friends how to use his emergency glucagon, Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat a very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more, go to gvokeglucagon.com/Stacey. That's gvokeglucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke should not be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information. Chapter 17, Driving and Diabetes. There are few things more exciting to most teenagers than getting their driver's license. There are few things more stressful for the parents. Add in diabetes, and seeing your child get behind the wheel may be one of the biggest stressors we can face. It certainly has been for me. I talk about learning from mistakes a lot, but this is one case where your mistake can hurt someone else. This chapter will probably be a bit more serious than the rest of the book, but that's on purpose. I had a scary brush with diabetes and driving years before my son's diagnosis, and it stayed with me. Just after college, a friend with type 1 crashed his car on the way to work. He just passed out behind the wheel, I assume from a low blood sugar. Luckily, he wasn't badly hurt, but it was a serious wreck and the car looked awful. As you can imagine, almost 30 years ago, the technology was very different. My friend did not have a pump or a CGM, and he was using the older, less predictable insulins. These differences have made things better, but of course, they haven't made things foolproof. I've tried to make my friend's experience a cautionary tale for me and not a horror story. Like a lot of diabetes parents, I started thinking about driving long before giving my child the keys. In our state, North Carolina, you can take a driver's education class as early as 14 and a half and get your permit at 15. That means you always have to drive with an adult in the car. A graduated license starts at 16. You can drive by yourself only between 5 a.m. and 9 p.m. 6 months later, you are eligible for what the kids call their after nines. At 18, you get a full license, no real change, but the license itself switches from vertical to horizontal layout to show you're no longer a minor. In terms of diabetes rules and regulations, check with your state's Department of Motor Vehicles and talk to other families who've been through the process. Many states have special licensing rules about medical conditions. Almost all of them are different. I'll be honest, for us in North Carolina, it was clear as mud. I'll explain. Benny goes to public school, but my daughter attended a private high school, and we really liked the efficiency and ease of the driver's ed course she took. It was a scheduling issue more than anything else. There was just more availability for our busy schedules, so we signed Benny up. I informed the school that he had type 1 and wore a pump and CGM. We shared our agreed-upon strategy for checking blood glucose before driving. More on that soon. The organizer and instructors didn't bat an eye. Benny was far from the first child they had in this school with type 1. The owner sent me a link to the DMV forms about driving with diabetes. I filled those out and had them signed by our endo, but no one ever officially asked for them. I even called the DMV and was told that if no one had specifically asked, then there was no case number and no one to send the forms to. They told me they would not accept them if I mailed them in without a case number. They'd end up in the trash. Really? Meanwhile, our friend who went to a public school driver's ed was pulled out of the class because he'd checked the box saying he had diabetes. He needed to submit those forms, and he had to reschedule the class. I run a large local Facebook group for parents of kids with type 1. We both posted about our experiences and found that public or private, almost every teen had a different experience. It's so frustrating. Some parents recommend you just not disclose, but that doesn't sit right with me. I think it's important to disclose if asked. There are insurance and liability issues, and we've spent these kids' childhoods telling them not to hide their diabetes. Why would we tell them to do the opposite now? After a lot of conversation, we think the difference may have been the actual forms the kids received. Ours asked us to check a box if the person had ever had a medical event or took a medication that led to a seizure, diabetic or otherwise. Other parents had a form that asked if they just had a medical condition, such as diabetes. I have no idea why there would be two forms, and in discussion with other parents, it didn't seem to matter if the driver's ed classes were public or private school. The forms varied regardless. Moira McCarthy's excellent book, Raising Teens with Diabetes, addresses driving very well, and she even has a contract for your teens to sign. We did this with Benny. The technology has changed since she crafted that chapter, but the thinking is the same. Moira and almost every expert recommends that people with diabetes know their blood glucose every time they get behind the wheel. It's easy to find out if your teen is doing a finger stick. You can just look at the meter later. But how do you confirm a glance at a Dexcom graph on the teen's phone? When Benny was learning to drive, we used the Road Ready app to keep track of driving hours. I'm sure there are others out there, but this was very easy. It emails info to the parents and gives you a simple printout of the log for the DMV. It also ensures your child is using their phone every time they get in the car, but before they start driving. If they don't log those hours, they can't get their license. We took advantage of that. After Benny finished with the Road Ready app, he was to open the Dexcom app and look at his number. We decided no driving below 90 or above 300 to start. That high is less about being impaired, at least for Benny, and more about just not feeling great behind the wheel. This was easy when he had his permit because an adult was always in the car with him to make sure he checked. He got into the habit very quickly, but I didn't want to rely on his habit all the time. How to verify? I asked Benny to take a screenshot of his Dexcom every time he got behind the wheel. It was an extra second to add to the routine. Open the Road Ready app, open the Dexcom app, screenshot, done. He did that for the first month or two after he was allowed to drive on his own. One of my proudest parenting moments was soon after Benny got his license. He was heading home from wrestling practice and texted that he would be a little late. He'd pulled over because his Dexcom had alerted that he would soon be below 80. He was treating and would just wait it out. It's hard to express how exciting it was to get that text. I was absolutely overjoyed. He told me where he was in a church parking lot about 10 minutes from our house. I was so pleased that he didn't decide to just tough it out and drive those last few minutes. Smart and responsible. Of course, a few minutes later, I was back to freaking out. He asked if I could start heating up his dinner. I don't know about your kids, but high school schedules can be brutal. And during sports or theater activities, we rarely ate all together. Benny would often come home from wrestling at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and heat up whatever we'd left for him. I assumed this meant he was on his way. After all, it only takes a minute in the microwave. But then 10 minutes went by and he wasn't home. 15 minutes. Where was he? That parking lot is almost around the corner from us. Did he not come up from the low? Did he have a regular non-diabetic car crash? I was really starting to panic when he texted, "Blood sugar is going back up. I'm on my way." He hadn't started driving after giving me the dinner order. Looking back at the texts, it was clear I had just misunderstood. Whew. Truly a really proud moment for me. No big deal for him. He was doing what we'd agreed on. But wow, I was so happy. It was also great that he didn't freak out when he got the alert. He safely pulled over. That was something we'd talked about when he had his permit. I told him he needed to stay calm and not just stop in the middle of a busy highway or in the middle of the median if the Dexcom goes off. An eye-rolling, "Really, Mom?" moment. But I think it's important to talk about these things. These kids don't know what they don't know about driving. Moira was invaluable in reminding me to talk to both kids about where to safely pull over if needed, not just for low blood sugar, and where to park safely to wait things out. In terms of treating, Benny has always relied on juice boxes and sometimes Gatorade or glucose gummies. He has always hated tabs. When we talked about what to leave in the car, I pictured always restocking Gatorade, and frankly, I worried about him getting the cap open. I've heard stories of adults with lows who struggle to open the juice bottle or stick the straw in a juice box. "Mom, just give me a bottle of tabs," he said. And just like that, the kid who never wanted to eat a glucose tab, and we're talking 14 years here, saw that a bottle of tabs that won't freeze or melt was a lot more practical than his usual options. I think that's partly a sign of him growing up and partly a sign of just how badly he wanted to drive. Either way, I'll take it. If your kiddo really prefers something else, I've heard Skittles, jelly beans, or Starburst are great options. Again, you're looking for something that can't melt or freeze, depending on where you live, and sugar that's easy to open and consume if someone is by themselves. When the kids were younger, I drove a minivan for probably about 12 years. I joked I could live out of that thing for a week. There were so many snacks and supplies in it. I don't think Benny wants to do the same in his car, but I think it's a good idea to have backup stuff, not just diabetes stuff. You want a tire gauge, a flashlight, and a first aid kit, right? When I lived in upstate New York, I also had a blanket just in case, and I always like to have water in my car. So why not throw in a little backup diabetes kit with at least a meter, a protein bar, and a few emergency glucose tabs? I think everyone with a medical condition should wear a medical alert bracelet or necklace. Some feel an ID medical card in the wallet is enough. Lots of adults with T1D get tattoos. Whatever you choose, I believe your child must wear something that identifies they have diabetes. To me, a seatbelt cover or relying on their insulin pump is not enough. In a severe accident, they may be thrown from the car, or the pump may be ripped off. Again, scary stuff to think about, but important to address. If your teen has resisted a medical ID, driving may be a powerful enough motivating factor to get them to change their mind. What happens if you find out your teen is driving low or otherwise breaking the rules of your diabetes contract? As you're managing life with diabetes, Edgepark is here to support you on your health journey. Discover convenience and peace of mind with Edgepark, your trusted supplier in diabetes management supplies. Edgepark has a wide variety of pump and CGM solutions from top brands to fit your unique needs. Plus, Edgepark works with most insurance companies and handles the paperwork to navigate insurance complexities for you and make the ordering process as seamless as possible. You work hard to manage your diabetes. Let Edgepark take care of the rest. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Edgepark logo. This is a tough one because getting a license is exciting. It means freedom, not just for your teen, but for you. You've probably got more time for yourself because you're not driving your kid everywhere anymore. But the stakes are just too high to let them break the rules. It's hard to hear, but if they hurt someone, your child can face jail time. And of course, they will have to bear the guilt and trauma that could go along with hurting someone else. Because of this, most experts recommend taking the keys away for the very first infraction. And you can put that in your contract. Length of time is up to you, of course, but if it's painful, like 2 weeks or even a month, it's a good bet it won't happen again. Driving was not a rite of passage I was looking forward to. I hated when both kids started driving, but it's part of our lives. Like everything with parenting, you have to decide how to tackle it, how hard to manage it, and when to let go. Driving is also a time when parents who haven't yet turned on a tracking app start thinking about using one. This subject could be its own book, but let's touch on it briefly. There are a bunch of phone apps that make this easy. Newer cars have GPS built in. My advice here is that if you decide to turn on Life 360 or Find My Friends for your child with diabetes, you need to turn it on for every child in the house. Our rule has been that anytime our kids leave town or are on the road for more than an hour, they share their location via an app. My daughter will be 21 soon, and I'm going to ask that she continue to share for long road trips and unusual situations, but it'll be her decision. I think a helpful way of looking at these trackers is to not assign a value to them. There's nothing inherently good or bad about the apps themselves. It's about how you use them. I wouldn't want to track my kids or my spouse or my parents without thinking it through and having a conversation with them about it. First, what's the purpose? What are the parameters? And what's our agreement about communication and consequences? It's ultimately a parent's decision, but this is a lot like the conversations around remote monitoring of a CGM. Let's say you have your child turn on the tracking app. Could you agree to not text your child if they're home on time, if they check in with you regularly and they aren't getting into trouble? But agree that if they don't answer a text after a certain period of time, or if you see their location looks odd or looks dangerous, then you're going to act. There is a good argument to be made about personal growth for the children here, too. A lot of parenting experts will tell you that over-tracking children creates more fear in them and can reduce independence in the long run. You know my parenting philosophy is about learning through mistakes. I want my kids to learn the same way, within reason. That's a tough one, for sure. One last note here. We drive a lot, and now that we have 4 licensed drivers, it actually makes those long car trips a little easier. Last year, Benny and I took a trip to Florida, just the 2 of us. Leo was still at her school, and Benny wanted to visit friends from camp. The camp is in Georgia, but it seems like all of his friends live all over Florida. We split the driving on the way down. At this point, he'd been driving for 2 years and had his full license for 1 year. I will not lie, I was vigilant, no naps, and I had my eye on the speedometer the whole time. On the way home, I loosened up. I felt more confident in his driving. I did close my eyes for a bit, but first I told Benny if he got a speeding ticket, he'd pay the fine and lose driving privileges for 2 weeks. It was I-95, so I wasn't worried about us being the fastest car on the road. I got my nap, and he did great. Being alone in the car with him all that time gave me the chance to learn what music he's listening to these days and to have some great conversations. I never thought I would miss our back and forth driving all over town when he was in elementary and middle school. Driving is a huge milestone for any teenager and their family. It's the end of an era and the beginning of something new. I don't think I'll ever really stop worrying, but that's nothing new. As always, I've got to give him the tools he needs to stay as safe as he can, and then let him hit the road. Ask your doctor. Can you help me figure out what our state requires for driving with diabetes? Do you have any concerns or advice about my child being safe behind the wheel? What blood sugar range do you generally recommend for driving?
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I'll link up more information about just driving in general with diabetes. There's some great articles out there. I'll link up Moira McCarthy's book as well. And of course, a link to my books. As for Benny, he does not have his car this year. He's away at college. And as a freshman, I think they allow cars at school, but we just didn't think it was a great idea. So he wasn't too thrilled about that. But he'll get his car when he comes home for the summer. And I'll worry again, as I always do, when anytime either of my kids are driving. Who am I kidding? I worry about my kids all the time. Doesn't matter if they're behind the wheel or not. All right. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
I love when I don't have to deal with a faraway mail order system, when I can just pick up diabetes supplies from the pharmacy. Omnipod is the only tubeless full-feature insulin pump available through the pharmacy. It makes it simple to pick up pods and insulin in the same place, and you avoid those high startup costs from traditional tubed insulin pumps. You simply pay as you pod. Remember, pharmacy means no commitment, and pharmacy means you can switch now, even if your tubed pump is under warranty. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.